Hey helpers, you asked, what are cognitive distortions and how do I explain them to my clients? I absolutely love this question, in part because I am a cognitive therapist. I'm certified by the Academy of Cognitive Therapy, and this is kind of a foundation of a lot of therapy, is really understanding what cognitive distortions are, and they have a lot of different names. So sometimes they're referred to as automatic negative thoughts, or ANTs for short, and sometimes they're referred to as harmful thinking habits. In truth, it doesn't really matter what we call them. The important thing is that we're familiar with the concept of cognitive distortions, and then we find a language in which we label those distortions. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the language is important because we're going to teach clients how they can catch those thoughts. And the only way we can do that is if we know what we're looking for. So let's talk for a second about what they are. Cognitive distortions are a form of irrational thinking, right? And they're irrational thoughts, skewed perspectives, right? And they're not usually because they're impossible to believe. They're actually a lot of times very believable to the person who's having them. It's just usually they're skewed because they're a negative reflection of the self. They're being self-critical, deprecating. We'll talk more about that, and that's what makes them skewed. Is they're not always based in reality. They're missing a lot of the big picture, right? A lot of the reality testing. So cognitive distortions are irrational thoughts that influence how we perceive the world, how we feel, and how we act. While it's normal to experience these from time to time, frequent or extreme distortions can be harmful. In this video, we'll help you identify and understand common cognitive distortions, which provide the tools to help clients recognize, challenge, and of course, reframe their thoughts in a more balanced perspective. All right, so let's walk through some of the most common cognitive distortions. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a list of some of the ones that are top of mind. And as a therapist, you don't have to stick to this particular language. As you're working with clients, as stuff comes up, you guys can come up with the names together. And that can be fun, right? Therapy is not prescribed for the same for everybody, right? Therapy is very much a case to case. It's not a one size fits all, and each therapeutic endeavor, every therapeutic relationship is unique unto itself. But these are some of the principles that help structure therapy in the way that we do the change work. All right, so don't get too hung up on the specific language. This is just a little bit of a guide for you, okay? All right. So some of the most common beliefs start off with the all or nothing. This is one of the more easily understood ones. It's very black and white thinking, all good, all bad. I'm horrible, I'm unlovable, right? Or I'm the best thing on the planet. This is kind of what we're talking about. So this is viewing situations in the extreme, and there's really no middle ground, right? Polarized thinking is sometimes how it's referred to. An example would be if I'm not a complete success at this project, then I must be a total failure, right? And this brings up feelings of anxiety, right? Anxiety about perfectionism, not being perfect, and that leads to feeling easily discouraged, right? People will give up before they even get started because they get so caught up in this black and white thinking. Overgeneralization, that's another common one. Overgeneralization is just what it sounds like. You always this, you never that, right? Or I always this, I never that. I never get this right. I'm always messing things up. People are always unhappy with me, right? I'm just going to go eat a can of worms, right? That's kind of what overgeneralization is, but it's very, very damaging, right? Because it takes a very micro experience and extrapolates it into every possible future experience we can have, which then causes us to have that self-fulfilling prophecy because we don't want to then take acceptable risks in life, and then we don't gain, right? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. We just kind of live in a hole and in our cave, right? So that's kind of what overgeneralization does. It causes us to kind of freeze and not take chances. acceptable risks, right? An example of that would be like drawing broad conclusions from a single incident. I failed on one test, so I'm bad at school, right? It's overgeneralizing the self, our ability to perform, right? Our sense of adequacy and our ability to ad- adapt to new circumstances on the fly is compromised because we don't believe in our ability to adapt and figure things out as we go, right? This leads to feelings of being hopeless or defeated. The mental filter. This is selective abstraction, sometimes it's referred to, and this is kind of sometimes also referred to as a negative filter, where we won't really consider the positive, right? If your boss gives you a a positive compliment, you kind of minimize it. You're like, whatever, like I don't want the attention. But then if you get one little constructive feedback, you blow it out of proportion. Oh, my boss hates me. They think I'm doing a horrible job. I don't know why I even applied for this. You know what I mean? So it's, again, and that's negative filtering, sometimes called mental filtering or selective abstraction. And that's just only looking at the negative and discounting the positive, right? An example would be fixating on a negative feedback despite receiving praise, kind of like what I just brought up. That leads to feeling disappointed and self-critical and critical of others, right? Discounting the positive is pretty much the same thing. You're rejecting positive experiences by telling yourself they don't count, right? Well, they don't count because I'm only concerned about improving in this one area. We don't give ourselves credit where credit's due. And this is a little bit different than negative filtering. Negative filtering's geared more toward other people and the feedback they give us. Discounting the positive is more with what we do with ourselves, right? Are we giving ourselves any credit for what we've accomplished for the day, or are we only looking at the things that we didn't check off our list, right? And this is a very sometimes subtle one, and it's easy to get tripped up by. So they only complimented me because they felt sorry for me, or unworthy, skeptical of praise is kind of what it leads to, those feelings. Jumping to conclusions, this one can be a number of things. Probably my favorite example is mind reading, and this is assuming you know what others are thinking. And we're just going to kind of chew on this one for a second. When somebody has a lot of anxiety, social anxiety, there's something called reflected appraisals, right? In psychology, reflected appraisal means that we value ourselves based on how we think other people value us, right? So our price tag in terms of our self-esteem is predicated on what other people say we're worth. Now, you and I both know that's not true. We know that you're valuable, I'm valuable, we're all unique, we're all amazing, right? But as human beings, when we're seeking external validation, it's very easy to then make other people our mirror. And that's why in therapy, oftentimes I'll say, be careful who you make your mirror. We all have mirrors. We all have people we look up to. We all have people we admire. We have role models, but we get to choose, right? We get to choose who our mirror is. And by that, we can choose who we ask for advice from. We can be choosy about who we ask for opinions from and who we bounce our ideas off of, right? And so it's very important that we are careful who we let appraise us before we take that in. Somebody with a very secure attachment style is still going to ask for feedback because that's just wise, right? So it's wise to seek wise counsel and a multitude of wise counsel, not letting one person be your sounding board, but letting many people be your sounding board who are in a position to give you legitimate feedback. You wouldn't ask your pastor necessarily for financial advice, and you wouldn't ask your CPA for advice about your faith, right? So they have different lanes, right? Different verticals they live in, different lived experience and expertise. And so you're definitely going to want to be careful about who you ask for feedback. But ultimately, we want to be able to validate ourselves first, right? Because if you keep a high price tag on yourself, then other people will kind of meet you there, right? There's a saying that we teach other people how to treat us. And so mind reading is the enemy of that. Mind reading is assuming what we think people are thinking about us, and that is bad. That is all bad. That is critical. And so then we, inevitably respond that way to what they're saying and thinking about us in our head, right? And oftentimes that again leads to that self-fulfilling prophecy. An example would be, they just don't like me. They don't look at me, so they must not like me. Feeling, that would lead to you feeling obviously anxious, withdrawn, and excluded, right? Well, if they're not going to like me, then I'm just going to, not like them before they can not like me, right? And again, that's that whole thing. Fortune telling also falls into this category. That's another harmful thinking habit where we predict negative outcomes without any evidence, right? Without anything to really go on to say, oh, I think that's a bad idea. It's not like, oh, you tried that last time, and if you're going to do it the same way, you're probably going to get the same result. No, negative fortune telling is just assuming bad things will happen just because, right? And nothing will go right. Murphy's Law, right? I know I'm going to fail this exam, so why even try, right? That leads to feelings of being worried, feeling hopeless about your ability to excel and succeed, right? And this is all that self-talk, and we have to be very, very, very careful about what we say to ourselves, right? Because it will seed into core beliefs, which is a whole other topic. But automatic negative thoughts become sometimes like a broken record, right? As we're thinking about life, as we're doing life, the more comfortable we get with this kind of self-talk, then the more apt we are to engage in that when we're feeling stressed or discouraged or challenged, right? Another one is magnification, or sometimes known as catastrophizing, right? And a minimization, but catastrophizing is just what it sounds like. The most possible worst case scenario is the most likely scenario. Like, you've already gone 10 steps ahead in your mind about all the things that could go wrong, and in reality, it's not the most likely at all. But we've kind of worked ourselves up so much to try and prevent this thing from happening in our head that we're already anxious and physically reacting as if it has already happened or is happening. That's sometimes what triggers anxiety attacks, panic attacks, is the fear of having a panic attack or the fear of something bad happening as if it's already happened. It's that survival instinct, that fight or flight, that acute stress response that kicks in, and it's hard to stop once it starts. So it all starts with our thoughts, though. A definition of catastrophizing would be exaggerating negatives while downplaying the positives, right? This one mistake is a disaster, right? This leads, again, to feeling overwhelmed and really insecure. All right, emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is believing that your emotions reflect reality. And oftentimes, how we feel is not what's real, right? That's kind of a little mantra I try and remember. Like, this feeling will pass, and the way I'm feeling right now is valid. All feelings are valid, right? But not all feelings are based in reality in terms of how we're thinking about a situation. So in CBT, we believe in the ABC model, right? There's the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence, and that intermediate is our thought process. And our thoughts elicit emotions. Emotions elicit behavior. Behavior is a means to cope with those emotions, to address the fear of the thing that we're thinking is going to happen. That's the thought. And it's an attempt to dodge any negative outcomes. But then ultimately, what happens is we end up having collateral damage because we're reacting to something that's probably not even going on. So that is why ants, harmful thinking habits, cognitive distortions are so dangerous, right? Is because they have a direct consequence in how we react to things in life, how we interpret situations and events around us, be that relationships, be that our job, be that how we interact with our family, our children, everything, right? Goes back to our automatic thoughts, be those good thoughts, be those negative thoughts. They have an impact on how we do life, right? Should statements. Now, we've all heard the term, don't should on yourself, right? So stop shooting on yourself. I should do this. I should do that. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. Um, you know, I should have done that homework, that paper before, I watched that movie. Well, maybe that would have been helpful, but that can't do anything about that now, but shoulding gets us down. Shoulding is a waste of energy and it's not really helpful, right? And shoulding is defined as focusing on how you should be, which leads to guilt and frustration, meaning that sometimes that's also how we view ourselves, right? That whole could be a body image issue, could be a life status issue. I should be further along in life right now. I should have finished school. I should have excelled at my job, etc., right? I should be married right now. I should have a family right now. This isn't what I planned for my life at this age, etc. So we have to be very careful with should statements because they rob us of joy, right? There's a saying that comparison is the thief of joy. Comparative thinking and shoulding is a form of comparison, right? We're comparing sometimes ourselves to our ideal selves, and there's nothing wrong with ideals, but ideals are meant to keep us motivated towards something constructive, right? A goal. But when we get caught up in our ideals in terms of comparing it to ourselves, then that leads to feelings of shame, and shame is never helpful, right? There's a great book called The Gain and the Gap by Dan Sullivan. He also talks about it in 10x is easier than 2x, and really talks about we need to stay in the gain, focusing on our progress thus far, comparing ourselves to ourselves prior, as opposed to the gap between where we are and our ideal, right? And that's the difference between shoulding and taking credit, right? Taking stock for how much we've accomplished, right? So again, that's why it's a slippery slope is all. Okay. Next we have labeling. So labeling is just what it sounds like. I'm so stupid. Why did I do that? It's when we label, literally like stamp something on our forehead, like you idiot. That was so stupid of you. Why did I do that again? I can't believe I did that again. I'm unlovable. I'm incapable. Whatever it is, I'm unworthy, right? Whatever these thoughts are that we're having is a form of a labeling of ourselves, right? It's attaching negative labels based on one event. Again, it's kind of a mixture of overgeneralizing, right? And labeling. Example, I'm a loser instead of I made a mistake, right? We all make mistakes. That's human, right? But instead you get, really down on yourself and you're, again, just very self-loathing and you're not being fair, right? Because you wouldn't say that to somebody else, to a friend. You wouldn't beat them up that way, hopefully, verbally, but at least a feeling shame. And shame, again, is never, ever helpful. Shame is probably the worst thing for anybody, right? It's not constructive. It tears people down. They shut down. They stop trying. Guilt, okay. Guilt's constructive, but positive guilt. Shame, not so much. So stop shaming yourself, and labeling is one way we do that. Personalization, again, there's something I remember somebody told me, like Q-tip, right? I should keep Q-tips in my therapy office because you can give them to people as a reminder. Quit taking it personally, right? It's hard, right? Everyone ever said that to you? Like, don't take it so personally. That's hard, right? When something feels very personal or it's directed at you, how do you not take something personal? But it is a very slippery slope. That's why it's in this category of harmful thinking habits. By identifying and challenging these cognitive distortions, you can learn to label unhelpful thoughts and reframe them into more accurate, balanced, and complete thoughts, and can help you maintain a more balanced perspective, lower anxiety, and improve your self-esteem. So this is really kind of the crux of CBT. So once, again, we get in the habit of labeling, so these are just some of the labels: mind reading, catastrophizing, negative filtering, overgeneralization, comparative thinking, and the list can go on and on. You can create your own if you like. I have a handout you can have in the shop. I'll show it to you in a second. It's a easy little handout to give clients, and it kind of lists out what they are as a quick reference guide as you're working through this. But really teaching your clients the language of how to label their thoughts, and we all struggle with some of these. Nobody gets a pass, right? Everybody struggles with automatic negative thoughts. But I'll tell you what the secret is, and that is that we all struggle with some, but we tend to have the repetitive ones, right? Which means once you identify the one or two that you struggle with, they get much easier to catch. And in CBT, there's a mantra called catch it, check it, change it. Again, this catch it, check it, change it. And when we get really good at catching our negative thinking, our negative thoughts, our harmful thinking habits, our cognitive distortions, then we can kind of stop it in its tracks, right? Because a lot of therapy is learning to think about your thinking. And we're not really taught to think about our thinking, right? That really just happens in therapy and maybe some other places. But when we get in the habit of slowing our thoughts down, we can learn to catch it because we know what we're looking for. Because as you're doing like a mood journal, a thought journal, you're going to have your client track these things down, right? And I have a mood tracking, mood scales for you that include the harmful thinking habits if you like for free. And it's right there if you sign up for the email list. But what's really cool is like once you get in the habit of knowing what you're looking for, then it's much easier to challenge, right? And challenging would be that reframe. Is this thought accurate? Is it balanced? Is it complete, right? Because negative thoughts are not. Negative thoughts tend to be absolute. They tend to be statements. More accurate, balanced, and complete thoughts will have yes, but, or they'll be framed as a question instead of a statement, right? And so this is the work of CBT, but it all starts with learning to label and identify our harmful thinking habits. Then we can do the work of challenging those thoughts and restructuring them, reframing them, and then rebuilding them into more constructive, helpful thoughts, right? And that eventually gets down to our core beliefs and starts to change how our subconscious understands the self, right? But that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So this is the taking responsibility for things outside of our control. That's personalization, right? It's my fault the team didn't perform well, right? Is it really? But that leads you to feeling overburdened or guilty, right? That you have to fix everything. You have to control everything, but that's impossible, right? You can't control all the outcomes. You can't control all the moving parts to things in your life. You just can't. You can only keep your side of the street clean and hope for the best and hope everybody else does the same. So understanding cognitive distortions, we already kind of touched on it. They're patterns of negative thinking, patterns because they're repetitive. They'll come up over and over and over again. And these irrational thoughts are often rooted in our subconscious and can have an effect on how we perceive ourselves, others, and the world around us. So that's called a schema. A schema is the lens by which we view the world, and it can be shifted, it can be changed. That's what philosophy is. When somebody says they have a new philosophy or new religion, right? They've changed their schema. A lot of the times, the automatic thoughts we're having, good, bad, or otherwise, are just a reflection of our schema, right? Our deep-rooted beliefs about ourselves and the world, how it works, right? If I grow up believing the world is a good place and everybody's mostly well-intended, then I'm going to walk around and I'm going to be more likely to greet people and smile at them. If I grow up thinking everybody has an angle and they're just after me to get something, then I'm going to be a lot more guarded and pessimistic. So it affects how we do life, right? All right. So how they develop, right? Cognitive distortions develop by lived experience, right? And it's no surprise they're believed to develop through early childhood experiences and negative events, sometimes traumatic events that are really get deeply rooted in our nervous system. There's a really good book, The Body Keeps the Score, if you've heard of it. That's really what it talks about, is like, trauma never ever really leaves the nervous system. The body remembers, right? Just like a dog who's been abused will remember anytime, there's sudden movement, he might flinch, right? Don't forget. Our nervous systems are, the same, right? We tend to remember. Our bodies remember. So cultural and social influences, society, media, social media, right? We have to be very careful what we're taking in because the more we take something in visually, if we're listening to something, then that's going to have an influence on us, just in the same way that we're influenced by the people we hang out with, right? What's that saying? You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? In terms of they start to influence how you speak, the language you use, and eventually your perspective on the world and things. And so it's very important that we're choosy of the stimuli that we're taking in around us, be that people, be that TV, be that music, be that podcasts. It's important that we're continuing to feed positivity and things that build us up in our ears and eyes. Core beliefs are deep-seated beliefs about ourselves, others, and the world, and can trigger distorted thought patterns. For example, a belief like I am unworthy can lead to distortions such as discounting positive feedback, right? And core beliefs can be changed. They just take a lot of time, and they only happen as we start to reframe those automatic thoughts, right, about the self. And definitely automatic negative thoughts can have a dramatic impact on our quality of life because they are often what lead to arguments, disagreements with spouses, with family, with friends, coworkers, bosses, like our expectations of the world and how we think people should be, or the way they treat us and what that means to us, right? How we interpret things have so much to do with our automatic thoughts and what we end up ruminating on the events in our lives. So it can affect our emotional well-being. Constant negative thinking can lead to obviously increased anxiety, depression, and stress. It can affect our goal attainment because it increases our self-doubt and fear of failure, hindering progress and causing us to procrastinate and avoid the things we would otherwise feel motivated to do, right? It affects our relationships due to misinterpretations and false assumptions, and results in misunderstanding, which raises tension in relationships, and then, of course, causes damage. So, how do we correct distorted beliefs? We just kind of touched on that. It involves several principles of CBT. First, we have to identify the negative belief or distortion. That's that catch it part. Then we can learn to challenge our core beliefs about something. And core beliefs, we can have many, many, many core beliefs about different things, about relationships, about work, about money beliefs, right? Our belief systems. We don't have just one belief system, we have belief systems. We have a myriad of belief systems that are closely tied to our values and how we think the world works. And I say how we think because oftentimes it's our limited thinking that holds us back, right? As opposed to like an abundance thinking, right? So our thoughts are very powerful, and they oftentimes are the reason that we're unhappy in life or a status of life, right? Because they have a direct effect on our behavior and the chances we take and not the opportunities that we see. So when we learn to reframe our thoughts, then we can start to see things in a different light. We start to have a different kind of understanding. And most importantly, we start to seek understanding instead of blame, right? We start to look for the reason behind things before we get into the judgment about things. We start to see the problem as the problem and not the person as the problem. We start to focus on the solution more than the problem, right? So that's why reframing is so helpful. Another thing that helps is when we start living in alignment with our values. As you start to identify your core beliefs and your negative thoughts, and you start to challenge those, you get more in touch with what your values are, then you can start to live in alignment with your values, right? And you shift your focus from your negative thoughts into action, right? Rather than focusing on the outcome, which we can't control, we can then start to shift our energy and our focus onto action and things we can control. And that will lead to better outcomes, which will then reinforce that reframe of our belief system because now we have proof to back it up, right? And that's the problem with automatic negative thoughts is it keeps us stuck. We don't take risks, and thus there's no more lived experience as evidence to then back up a change of belief. So hopefully that makes sense. So in conclusion, understand that addressing cognitive distortions through CBT can lead to improved mental health, better relationships, and greater success in achieving personal goals. By challenging and reshaping core beliefs and thought patterns, individuals can foster a healthier, more balanced perspective on life. So, by shifting from negative thoughts to meaningful actions, individuals can improve their mood and motivation. So, really, it just starts by getting in the habit of tracking our thoughts, nailing the ones that give us the most problems, reframing them, and just changing that self dialogue, right? That committee in our head when we get upset or we're trying to, think through something. The better we can get at, if you're going to talk to yourself, at least have a productive conversation, right? So, if you'd like some more help with the handouts as you're working with your clients on this, you can head over to the mentalhealthtoolbox.com/shop. And you'll see some stuff there. I have lots of freebies. I also have some paid products. Usually the paid ones are pretty cheap, $1 for a handout. But if you want unlimited access to the handouts, courses, meditations, workbooks, it's $10 a month for the all access pass. And I'll put a link in the description for the all access pass as well. If you just want the handout for the cognitive distortions to give to your clients, I'll put that in the description and comments as well. I would love to hear your feedback and what you would suggest to new therapists. If you're a more seasoned therapist, what would you suggest to a therapist starting out in this field in terms of how they can address cognitive distortions with their clients? What's worked for you? Because, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. I'll be curious what your experience is. Please do leave a comment to share with the group. Okay. Now, there's also, if you head over to the website, thementalhealthtoolbox.com, and you just go over to shop, you can get right to some of the resources here if you want. If you click on any of these, it'll take you to the product. You can also go straight to the shop once you're logged in, and you'll see all kinds of cool handouts here. This is the cognitive distortions handout. And again, here's that all access pass. If you want to grab that, you can go to the website, thementalhealthtoolbox.com/shop, and just grab the all access pass there, $10 a month. You can just download everything at once if you want it. But I do try and add to the list several times a week if I can. That's my goal. So hopefully you find that helpful. It's been a pleasure walking through this with you. Let me know if it was helpful. If you have any other requests for content, I love the questions. So please shoot me a question if you're needing help getting started with the art or business of therapy. And all right, until next time, take care and keep thriving. Bye-bye.